covering for,
Pardon me.
I've just been covering for my daughter and son-in-law on their farm. It's called Link Farm, where they raise grass-fed beef, lamb, and pasture-raised pork and eggs. And so they've taken their first 3-day vacation in 3 years. And so I've been feeding animals and doing chores for the last 3 days. So one of the things that goes along with that is ticks. So I've already taken off 4 ticks today, but if you see me jump up and run, don't be alarmed. Don't worry. It's just me freaking out because there's a tick on me somewhere. So
goes with the territory, hey?
Yeah.
And of course, we don't really talk a lot about that, but spring is here, summer's coming, and this is a thing in Canada for sure, and other parts.
Yeah.
All right, well, welcome. This is our first slide. Should I just pop on to the next one?
Yep. This is just the holding place. So Sperling Vineyards is a family owned and run vineyard and winery in Kelowna. And I'm the 3rd generation born in Kelowna on our farm. And my niece, Jill, who's in the middle of the photos on the right, and her kids are the 3rd and 4th generations. And so they're doing the day-to-day details along with Jill's husband, Ricard, who's up there at the top, and my brother-in-law in the bottom, Paul Richardson, along with my sister, Susan. We're all like partners and working at making Sperling Vineyards a success. And so my parents grew and established the vineyards, I guess. I shouldn't say that. My grandfather established the vineyards, and but it was always a mixed vineyard and orchard. And then in my parents' generation, they converted it entirely to grapes. And then in 2008, that's when my generation took over with the next generation to make wine and have our own label. So it's been, slow progress, but fun. So regenerative vineyards, there's regenerative agriculture and then more specifically regenerative vineyard. And I wanted to show these 2 pictures to give you the contrast between, so the square picture there of the vine rows is probably what you've seen most often in the past of what a vineyard should look like. And so I wanted to show you, really make it obvious that vineyard there is a conventional vineyard. You can see that herbicides have been used, and most commonly around the world that herbicide is glyphosate. And then what I want to show you is a picture that you should get used to looking at as what a proper vineyard should look like. And that would be where you have cover crops and other plants growing in amongst the vines, so that and that's kind of what regenerative is all about. So it's getting rid of that monoculture and creating a place where many, not only plants, but insects, birds, other wildlife and critters live, where you can also still grow your crop and harvest your grapes or whatever that crop might be. And but you're using all of the surface area of the land to photosynthesize and to, I've just used the term keep it green. So minimal or no tillage is preferred. Keeping it covered all the time with plants, and having a diversity of plants in order to support more life. So the big thing about the greenness of it is that all of that green indicates photosynthesis, and photosynthesis is a process of taking carbon or CO2 from the air and turning it into plant matter and roots, and then all of that CO2 is basically being pulled out of the atmosphere and stabilized first in the plants and then in the soil. So it's increasing soil carbon, which relates to soil fertility, and also decarbonizing the atmosphere. So getting things kind of back to where they were, you know, probably a few hundred years ago.
It's so important, and it's such a big part of the conversation. I don't know if everyone understands carbon sequestration or the carbon story, but you know, if you don't hesitate to just ask for a little elaboration.
Yeah.
Because you know, that is the key. Like what we're trying to do with this type of farming, if you will, is to keep the carbon below the soil, keep it in the soil rather than in the air. Should I move the slide?
Yep.
I thought this was beautiful. I love this picture.
So just some of the things about having a diversity of plants means you're also attracting a diversity of insects and critters and microbial life in the soil. I think, you know, birds and insects are kind of the symbol of that diversity. And because we can see them, it's kind of hard to see the microbes other than, you know, maybe fungi when you're digging in the soil or that sort of thing. So so think of this as more of symbolic, but that it's, you know, there's more happening, and the more creatures and critters that you see, and the more diversity of life, the better it is for the soil and the plants that they're working with. So, you know, I think we're seeing, you know, more sort of kind of promotion of, you know, leave the dandelions growing in your lawn, let them flower, and use them as a food source for the early pollinating insects. And if you look at that circle of flying sort of bee-like insects, bee wasp-like insects, you'll see in the middle there's a honeybee, but all the other ones around it are also very important pollinators. And the one that's on the dandelion there, I'm pretty sure is a parasitic wasp, and they play a role in helping to rid the vineyard or the plants of pests. And so, you know, there's kind of this little battle that's going on amongst all of these creatures, not only for helping the plants in terms of pollination, but also to keep things balanced and in check. And that's kind of, you know, the beauty of an organic system, is that you're not relying on pesticides or human intervention to keep the fruit clean or to keep the crop healthy, but you're allowing nature to have the checks and balances. So, you know, a lot of times when we're dealing with, you know, just scouting in an organic vineyard, and you walk through and you'll see, oh, you know, here's a little powdery mildew, or here's some damage from, you know, an insect, but when it's localized and it's recovering, then you know that the system is working. So it's not like you have to react to every little thing that you see, because often the system is taking care of that for you.
Shall we move on?
Yep.
This is a great picture, though. I mean, I think about the story, you know, I can't, how many times dandelions were bad, and, you know, bees, oh, you know, get rid of all the beehives. And I don't mean honeybees, I just mean, you know, where you live. And so, yeah, it's very interesting that now the thought process is kind of shifting back to leave it, let it be.
So this is a picture of our vineyard, and getting close up with the cover crop. You can see the vines in the background. You can see the city of Kelowna and the mountains. But really, like, we've planted many of these plants that are growing. So you have white clover, red clover, but then there's also volunteers like the dandelions, which were introduced by European settlers. And then, you know, native plants are also very useful. One of the things about our vineyard at Sperling is that we still have overhead sprinklers. And so we can actually keep the cover crop supported because, drip irrigation is very much focused just under vine and to water the vines themselves. Whereas with overheads, you're sprinkling a larger area. So on the one hand, it uses more water, but on the other hand, we can support a larger diversity of plant life because of it. So we're not changing that. A big part of the greenness and having plants growing under the vines actually keeps our vineyard cooler. So you've probably seen those, streetscapes where it shows you a street with trees on it versus a street without, and shows you, the 20-degree temperature difference in the summer or things like that. And that's happening in vineyards as well. So that clean cultivated vineyard, you can measure at the soil level compared to the canopy level and the fruiting zone. You can there's a whole temperature gradation there where you have so much heat at the ground level, and that's radiating and contributing to our climate change. So what we're trying to do, obviously Kelowna is known for its cool climate, not like Oliver and Osoyoos where it's much hot or traditionally much hotter and has that reality of being, part of the Sonoran Desert. But Kelowna should be cooler. We're at the 50th parallel. That's one of the most northerly vineyard locations on the planet. Yet we've had these 40-degree days last summer and, many days above 35 degrees, which, to be honest, when I was growing up as a kid in the vineyard, we never had that experience, never, right? And so it's a big swing. So what we're trying to do is, use all of these good things and this plant cover to also keep our wines more elegant, having acidity, and being true to the cool climate nature of the varieties that we grow. So just one quick point on that, just that the legumes, so clover, alfalfa, trefoil, those are all nitrogen fixing plants. So there's lots of nitrogen in the air too. And so those plants are working with microbes in the roots to capture and hold nitrogen. So they actually help with fertility. There's the carbon fertility and the nitrogen fertility. So they're working, on both fronts to make the soil naturally more fertile.
Is it true, and maybe I'm mixing it up, but aren't chickens a good contributor of nitrogen to soil? Or
yes, yes. They're like chicken manure is very nutritious. It also has a lot of calcium in it. And in fact, our soils, and I was just sharing with Pat Bowen recently that our soils are actually very high in calcium. So, all those things, that stuff that they talk about, calcitic soils in Burgundy and Champagne, that are contributing to the minerality and the kind of the expression and the all of the things that you associate with those cool climates. They also have calcitic soils. So we don't use chicken manure because it would, could get us into an extreme situation that would stress the plant. So actually cow manure is preferred. So we fortunately have a history of cattle on our property. So we've always raised cattle actually on those mountains that you see in the background of the vineyard. Yeah, was where our cattle were ranged, which means their summer pastures were over there. And then in the winter, they're in the barnyards at the base of our vineyards. In 2008, we kind of split the properties between my aunt and uncle and my cousins and us, and they kept the cattle. So we use the cow manure for the vineyards as well.
I love that, keeping it all in the family. It's awesome.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it's pretty convenient, but it's, you know, it's something that was part of the agricultural cycle. You know, most people weren't doing just a single crop, especially in the late 1800s, early 1900s, right? So this one just quickly talks a little bit about our calcitic soil, superfine particles. We have a diversity of soils on the property because of the influence of glaciers and what was deposited by the receding glaciers, but much of it is lacustrine, which is that calcitic clay, very fine particles. So, and then this photo is showing you, this is like a late winter shot in the vineyard or early spring. We've had the snow melt happen, and you can see that under the snow we had grass, and obviously it doesn't grow in the winter, but those roots provide channels for the meltwater to actually go into the soil and fill the soil with moisture rather than running off. And then it also helps to reduce the amount of evapotranspiration. So that's water moving out of the soil and into the atmosphere that we don't want to take place. We want that moisture to stay in the soil as long as possible so that we don't have to irrigate as much.
I don't think I would have ever thought that roots like that would be so valuable. But when you point it out like that, it's like amazing.
Yeah, so bare soil is subject to wind erosion and also moisture erosion. So water running off of a slope will carry soil with it. So that will, you know, reduce the fertility of the soil on the slopes. It'll release carbon back into the atmosphere. So that's where the cover crops really are important for not just bringing the carbon into the soil, but holding it there and keeping it in the soil.
That's so cool. That's so cool. I just think that's a great story. Like, would never have thought of it. So here we are.
There you see, maybe you can see the green between the rows, but you know, it's sort of like the whole cover is green. So that's our vineyard.
I'll be looking forward to these sunsets.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's that time, right?
It is. Yeah.
So this is there's a lot of information on this slide, and I you know, we talked about should we kind of simplify it, but really what I wanted to show is that whether you're choosing organic products, regenerative or biodynamic, there's a lot of good happening, you know, with producers that are working in these ways. And regenerative is, maybe it's a more recent term, but it's something that more growers, not just of grapes, but of other crops, can participate in. And so if we're talking about something like raising animals, like my daughter and son-in-law are doing, they're using regenerative practices. So they have fields, most of them in their case are rented. So they basically go around in our region, find pieces of land that people are either in converting from field crops, for example, or just they've just left it fallow. And so they rent those properties and they graze animals on them. They'll often plant a diversity of plants that are suitable for either hay or grazing. And then they'll do what's called mob grazing or rotational grazing. So the animals are in a fairly small area for maybe 2 days, 1 or 2 days. With cattle, it's 1 day. With sheep, it's 2 days. and they eat the grass, they stomp on the plants, and they pee and poo, and then they move to the next area. So all of that really stimulates a lot of plant growth and of microbial diversity in the soil. And so it's a good way to, I guess, have low inputs, like there's essentially no chemical inputs. What they're inputting is just the seed that they put down at the beginning. And even that is, they allow, at a certain stage, they'll allow those plants to seed so that they continue to renew themselves. And so that's, you know, one aspect of regenerative agriculture. And then when you're working with perennial crops like grapes or orchards, then it's what you're growing under those vines or trees that makes it regenerative.
I think it's good to point out that biodynamics here at Stonebrook, am I saying that wrong?
Southbrook, yeah.
Southbrook in Ontario, Niagara-on-the-Lake, biodynamic, first one in Canada, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then organic, so Ann Sperling, organic, right?
Yeah, and regenerative.
So, and now regenerative. So this model is actually, there's a big yellow circle, the big green circle, and then the big aquamarine kind of circle. And then the crossover is where we're capturing kind of some powerful points, right? That's essentially what and the sweet spot is right there, right?
Yeah, and above it really, because there's the biodynamic regenerative just above that too. And like really, you know, to be honest, I would say that biodynamic is the original regenerative. It's all about plants and animals on the farm working together to create fertility, and the use of cover crops or of keeping the soil active and growing things or supporting has always been a part of biodynamics. So, you know, but there's more to biodynamics. There's all the details of the preps, the compost preps, and there's also, you know, some ritual involved. And I think that, you know, that's where, you know, maybe people don't necessarily want to embrace the whole aspect of energy and you know, that's those kind of forces. And so, you know, I don't know, biodynamics gets kind of pushed to the side a little bit, but really it's always been about sequestering carbon and having carbon in the soil as a source of fertility.
Right. I think perhaps there is a simplification, you could say, with regenerative farming, where you don't have to observe leaf, root, earth days. I mean, there's 4 types of days in biodynamic farming, whereas in regenerative, it's perhaps more forgiving.
Yeah, well, and it's, maybe, you could say it's more of a simpler model, but it really depends on, you know, your crop and all of that. So, you know, growing grapes, I think at any point, at any time is fairly complex, and especially because we're evaluating those grapes based on the wine that, you know, we're putting in bottles and you're enjoying in your glass. So there isn't really any other or many other foods that are evaluated in the same way.
100%, 100%. So I'm going to, yes, on that note, I'm going to stop the share. So let me just do that. I'm going to stop the share, and we're going to hop over to another presentation. Hello, everyone. I can see everyone in the room. Lovely to see you. I hope Cassandra is answering your questions if you need questions answered. Hello, Tony. I'm going to share a different presentation, which is going to highlight the bottle offer that we have. And the hope is that by sharing this information, we kind of connect the regenerative story with the wine story, because in fact, what are we doing? We're making wine in a slightly modified method as well. Is that correct, Ann? Would you say that we're using a slightly different approach to making wine, therefore, as a result of regenerative farming? Or
Yes, I think that for me, it's more about the winemaking gets easier when as the grapes get better, and that sort of betterness is coming from how we're farming. So when there's a lot of integrity in the fruit, and what I guess what I call stuffing, the things that makes the fruit healthier as it's growing in the vineyard, and also makes the wines better. And that's where less intervention, more natural methods can also play a role in that expression of those grapes, because there's enough going on, and there's enough sort of stuffing in the wines that they have life, and they have the ability to age and to show harmony without a lot of makeup.
Since we're
Or maybe no
transitioning,
makeup.
oh, sorry.
Yeah,
So
go ahead.
transitioning, I do have a couple questions for you. One is from Cynthia Opsel, and she's wondering, what do you do to rid an area of a vineyard if it had an invasive pest or plant? Are you introducing a type of plant to work? She says with the pest, but I guess it would be hope to work against the pest.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the first thing that we look at when there is pest pressure, I mean, so, whether you're talking about whether it's in the season or, kind of as an ongoing thing, but the first thing we always look at is the soil, and we have our the fertility elements like that we were talking about, like carbon and nitrogen in the soil. There's also the mineral elements, and even though we have loads of minerals, and ultimately that can express in the kind of structure of the wine, when you have too much of something, it can prevent the kind of access to other minerals in the soil. And that's pretty common in the Okanagan, in our lacustrine soils. So we'll look at things like pH, and just balancing out the mineral nutrition, and then and including organic matter, and sometimes that's enough to reduce the stress on the vines so that they can better resist pests. And then, but of course, we still have our we have some organic sprays, we have some teas that we use, and we also, particularly difficult, and last year with all the really hot weather, there were a lot of leaf hoppers, and so there's oils that can be used. There's kaolin powder, which is the clay that's used for making pottery. So we have a number of tools in the toolkit, and ultimately we'd like not to use any of them, but sometimes we do have to intervene, especially when we have extremes of weather.
The other question is from Tony Pearson, and he's wondering if Tori Pearson. So Tori is wondering if regenerative is a new or more defined sustainable.
So regenerative speaks particularly to carbon sequestration, and so that's the photosynthesis pulling carbon out of the atmosphere. And so when we're talking about methods, that's how do we accomplish that? But where there's certification for regenerative agriculture, it's about how much sort of plant coverage, how little tillage you do, but there's even some that base their certification on an increasing amount of carbon in the soil. So really, it's just looking at your farming methods and how that is affecting all of those particular things. A lot of sustainable programs are more about whether you're being a good citizen and, you're not causing pollution, you're not treating your employees badly, you're not, doing things like washing your sprayer out into a stream, those kind of things. So they're addressing different concerns. Sustainable tends to be, I'm not that much of a fan of sustainable programs. It tends to be a catch-all, or especially in terms of, as a reference. And often sustainable programs don't have anything to do with cover crops. They allow conventional sprays. They allow herbicides to be used. So, it's like I say, it's addressing different things. So it's always important to be a good citizen, but at the same time, it's not getting to the heart of things, something like what regenerative is doing, which is helping to address, it's helping agriculture to address climate issues and, going back to methods that are recapturing that CO2 that's been released by the, bad farming practices of the past.
It sounds like we're due for an article on, or a chart on comparisons between all of these methods. That would be, I'm sure the lines are quite blurry, but it would be interesting to attempt something. And apologies, Tori, for getting your name wrong. I'm sorry about that. I wasn't looking at the people there, so.
No problem. You're doing a great job. Thanks, Cassandra. And thanks for the questions. That's awesome. I think the thing that captured my imagination was the health of the soil. And I just thought, how amazing. It's like a lightning bolt. It's like, whew, we're going to go after the key. So, along with that is the sequestration, which, and I don't know if I have it maybe backwards, but I would think when you are pursuing microbial health of a soil and all the things that go with it, it's kind of like a perfect little big solution. I wouldn't say little, big solution, but sounding complex.
I think you're definitely on the right track. And soil microbes are very sensitive to tillage. So, and particularly the mycorrhizae fungus. So, you've probably heard about how there's that interconnectedness of plants. And, for example, the, with trees, there's a number of studies that have shown how trees kind of speak to each other in a forest, and it's really through the fungus that those connections are made. And when forest soils haven't been touched in hundreds of years, hopefully, whereas in agriculture, so much focus has been on tillage, and that's just destroying those microbes. So bacteria can take some of it, but the fungi really are destroyed by it. So that's another big part of regenerative is essentially no tillage.
I love that. We won't talk about that right now. Maybe we'll, I hope everybody's sipping something fabulous. I've got mine, but this is what I'm sipping, Organic Spirits Pet Nat. So Ann, please take it away.
Yeah, I'm just going to show you that you might have seen this label or the one that's on the screen. And basically we thought, wouldn't it be cool to do a really clean label, no adhesives, and recycle bottles, and kind of make a message about that. And then we found out after a couple of years of that was that really the liquor boards don't want that. And if you're going to try and sell it in the SAQ or some BCLDB, you got to stick something on the bottle anyway. So then we went back to our Vision Series label. So you might on shelves you might see either one. But basically same wine inside. Pet Nat is kind of a natural sparkling wine. So we harvest aromatic grapes, and we're focusing on the ones that we grow in our vineyard. So we have a really old planting of something called Pearl of Saba, which is a Hungarian origin
Could you repeat how
muscat
you pronounce
variety.
that, Anne? Sorry, could you repeat how you pronounce that? I've never quite
Yeah,
grasped.
Chaba. CSABA is pronounced Chaba, but
Thank
you know, if you say Saba, you know, it sort of works too. But so I always think of it like as your classic, you know, using the term garden variety. So it's probably something that people, it's vinifera. So and we've been growing it since the 1930s, but it's something that you might have in your backyard where you can eat the grapes. They ripen early. It's a short season variety. It doesn't, you know, it's not that demanding in terms of its care in the vineyard. And if you want to make some wine, you can make some wine, you know, that kind of thing. But they're really tasty grapes. So so that's kind of our basis, but we also use some, usually some Pinot Blanc in there. And we also have another early ripening aromatic variety called Bacchus. And so when it's done in this style, basically we press the grapes and settle it and then allow the natural yeast to start the fermentation. And when there's about 8 grams of residual sugar left in the wine, we put it in bottle, but we want the fermentation to continue. And that's going to give us about 1.5 to 2 atmospheres of CO2 pressure. And often it goes through malolactic fermentation in the bottle. But the other thing is that the fermentation, because it's active when we bottle, the wine doesn't require any sulfites, and yet it stays fresh. So so that's kind of the key to making this sulfite-free wine.
Do you want to speak a little bit to, there is a little sediment in the bottom. It is not harmful. It is cloudy. It is not a fault. These are things, you know.
Yeah, not filtered at all. The sediment is the yeast. So because there's, you know, it's continuing to ferment for about 1% of alcohol. There's, you know, the yeast have to be there. Yeast also scavenge oxygen, so it's doing some of the job of what SO2 would do in a still wine. And then of course the cloudiness gives the wine a bit more body. So one of the things about a pet nat is that if this ferment is successful, the wine should be completely dry, and it should be completely dry of sugars and malic acid. So you've got so that it stays stable in the bottle. So if you have a continuum of microbial activity in the bottle, it might spoil it. So in this case, we're working with the CO2 and the lack of anything left over in the bottle to keep it stable and keep it fresh.
And to be clear, I created this slide and it says an off-dry patio wine. It is not off-dry, it is dry.
No, yeah, you're right. That's the original spritz was off-dry in
Right.
a more of a Moscato style.
Right, right. It's delicious. I love the texture. I think this is a textural wine. I think it's a food wine. It's easy, I mean, low alcohol, but we don't need to talk about that. It's just very enjoyable and great with food. I can just imagine like some, you know, prawns or I don't know, crackers and cheese or a little hummus and celery, or I mean, lots of versatility here.
Yeah, very versatile. And yeah, and it's a nice starter. I've heard people, you know, comment that it's got cidery notes, which, you know, part of the cloudiness if you're into natural ciders, and also the malolactic fermentation that you get in a natural cider. So so yeah, it's about, you know, it's not meant to be pristine in the sense of champagne or.
So Pet Nat has made it out of the it's just for hipsters phase. Orange wine and pet nat. I mean, yeah. If Barb's drinking it, it's made it out of that
Listen,
down and dirty category.
I got my bottle at Legacy Liquor Store. They have a whole display of natural wine. It was on the main display. I think I paid $30 for my bottle, which is neither here nor there, because if I go in and pick something up, it's somewhere between 30 and 50 bucks. So I'm enjoying it, and I feel like it's like that cidery note's a very good observation. I think that's a really key point. Funky, but not rude. It's not rude. It's appreciated.
We like funky. We don't like rude.
Funky town. We're going to funky town.
We're going to funky town, not rude town.
Okay, so and then we have Ruby Pet Nat, which is interesting because I think of Lambrusco, I think of Sparkling Shiraz, I think of a few interesting styles, but how bold and brazen, Anne? What were you thinking?
Yeah, well, I guess, thinking about those sort of classic fruity sparkling reds from the past, probably from Italy. I guess one of the things that I didn't mention in the history of our family, on my mom's side, the Casorsos, they were from Piemonte, from around the Asti region. And so the grapes that, we've always grown were also suitable for spritzier, bubbly kind of wines, which would have been classic in their region. So, and of course, I love not only the sort of the fruity side of the sparkling reds, but like you mentioned, sparkling Shiraz and that sort of thing. So this definitely isn't competing with that. But
is it dry?
With the Shiraz, but it is dry, made in the same method as the white that we just had, the spritz white, and but using a fruity variety. Sorry, I just have. Give me a second.
No problem. Yeah, they're all under screw caps. Like mine's under a screw cap. And what was interesting?
Did I not see the last one being under a bottle?
So what she said is they're shifting it because the LDB and SAQ want labels on the bottle, so they're going to crown cap and a label. But when I opened this one, it was like, you could see the spritz rising up because you're letting oxygen in, right? It was like. But it's not high pressure at all. It's not high pressure.
There was a drink in the UK called Psst. And it was a 7-Up drink, and just filling the airspace while you're gone here, and I'm a good for that. Yeah. So this is actually Foch, and tonight I chose to put 2 wines made from Foch because it really tastes wonderful. And what we found especially in the tasting room is that when people taste it, they love it. And so there's been a long period of time when, like, we've been growing Foch since the late 1960s on our vineyard, and I've being a Canadian winemaker starting in the 80s, I think that almost every project that I've worked on at some point has made Foch, and we have these amazing old vines that produces delicious wine. So it's like, if you know something about wine, then you might shy away from it, but in fact it can make really delicious wine. So
I think the key here is old vines, and if anybody else has an input on this, old vines offer something more than just Foch, but certainly this, it's like 70s now, so you're talking like 50-year-old vines. Concentration, flavor, intensity, that's cool. Like,
and I think about them like some of the old vine Carignans that we see from time to time coming out of Chile or the south of France, where you get that that really nice density and silky texture. And that's one thing about Foch compared to all the vinifera varieties that we tend to grow, is that it's very low in tannin. So, and especially when you handle the fermentation with whole clusters, because all the badly made washes tend to have seed tannins, not skin tannins, because just the nature of the grapes don't have it. So, so we work with whole clusters in the fermentation to, you know, kind of access the skin of the grape for the color and the flavor, but not the tannin. And then we press those clusters to avoid getting seeds. And
Amazing.
then for the or influence from the seeds. So in the pet nat, I like to blend a little bit of Pinot Noir in there just to kind of lighten it up a little bit more. And of course, as you mentioned with the spritz, you've got the yeast sediment in there, giving the wine a bit of body. It's totally dry. It's through malolactic fermentation. And you're capturing this very young red in a bottle. So it's there's a lot of fruitiness there, the sort of raspberry notes and the red fruits that come through. So this I find is also versatile and fun. So there's the charcuterie thing, there's pizza, you know, like a nice flatbread coming off of a, you know, stone, something like that. So
would you say this is also crust. Would you also say this is a bit low alcohol? Like the other one was, I think, 8.3%. I was like, what is it?
Yeah, so the whites have ranged in the sort of 8 to 10% alcohol range. And this is lighter, like 11.5, 12%. But unlike sparkling, unlike like traditional method sparkling, this is one fermentation, whereas with traditional method, you're doing a second fermentation and adding close to 1.5% alcohol. This doesn't have that extra step or the extra alcohol because of it.
Quick question from our friend Deborah here. She's asking where, and here I get the test, Pearl de Saba. Are you one of the only growers? I know I've seen some at Country Vines, but are there other producers of the varietal?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know. I just, I know that in, we got like, I think I want to say in the 70s or 80s with some of the research that was happening with grape varieties. So like the famous study was the Becker project, but some additional varieties were either sourced or studied. And the Pearl of Saba was one of them, and a couple of other similar short season varieties. And so plant material could have been added to the mix, or it could have come from our vineyard, because I know that we did some plant propagation during that time as well to expand the plantings. So
if I understand what you're saying, is it's probably come from your vineyard if it's been propagated.
If anyone else has it.
Well, it's interesting because I know Country Vines Winery from one of the girls that I work with at Spud. She works there, so I'll have to ask her if she can get us some more information. Yeah,
it's an amazing grape. It's always super early. So in Kelowna, we harvested in August, and I think our earliest harvest was the 8th, but typically it's more around the 20th. So it was, my grandfather hated growing it because it was ripe in August, and the wineries that he sold to didn't want to take the grapes that early. And so most of the time the bees got most of the crop. So,
interesting.
So having our own, wine, making our own wine just allows us to harvest it at its optimum time.
Well, in my view, this is the Sperling Vineyards Nova 7. So the Sperling Vineyards spirits, we should all be drinking this.
Yeah.
We're saying goodbye to Melanie. Thank you, Melanie.
Okay, yes, I realize it's now 6:30, so if anyone
Yeah.
has to go, my apologies. We're just going to continue. It's being recorded, but if you want to hop back in after, it'll be on YouTube at some point in the next days. So thank you for coming out, Mel.
And do you have your own bees?
We don't have right now. No, we don't have hives on the property, but because it's aromatic and ripens early, the bees and wasps will find it. So sometimes honeybees, sometimes wasps. They can, they can sense it and they come to the vineyard, and they actually can shell out the berries. So that, once they've been in there, you'll have just these sort of dried husk of a skin and nothing else. So, yeah. So moving right along, Chardonnay, 2017 Chardonnay. This is Chardonnay and Pinot are actually some of the youngest plantings we have. We planted them in 2008. And the Chardonnay we grow at our highest elevation in the vineyard. And this is a Dijon clone 528. So it's a high quality clone, but is known to have lower acidity, but usually like in our vineyard, because of the altitude and our location, we're harvesting sort of at 8 to 10 grams of acidity. So we can, I think it's really well suited to our site, so that we can retain that, finer texture and mineral kind of framework in the wine. So this is whole cluster pressed and then fermented in barrels, and we do it with wild yeast. So I think for a classic style of wine, so this wine is filtered at bottling, so it's not cloudy, and we do use a small amount of sulfites at bottling, but it's a more of a classic style of wine ultimately in the bottle. And so for me, I think a classic definition of natural wine is how you manage the vineyard, so organic or biodynamic, particularly, and then, sort of how much intervention there is. So working with wild yeast and minimizing like additives and that sort of thing. So we're not kind of adding back anything that's as an enhancer, nothing to make the wine fatter, richer.
Right.
It's all about the yeast and what's coming from the vineyard. And then after 10 months in the bottle or in the barrel, we bottle it.
So what I think is interesting is if the vintage is 2017, like we're talking 5 years. So we've got a beautiful style that's well balanced, has spent some time resting and presenting itself. I know there's some people in the room that have this bottle, so I'd be curious how they like it, but I know this is just such a elegant style.
I wish I had time to rest and present myself.
Me too. Oh, Cassandra, we're going to move along. You will have a spa day soon. I know it. So this was very interesting because I hadn't seen this one before.
Yeah,
so
this is a new introduction in 2021. So we've been making orange wine using our Pinot Gris since 2014. But last year, I felt that the Riedel that we grow at our tasting room was, in a really good kind of composition to make an orange wine. And Barb's mentioned Southbrook, which is where I've been the winemaker since 2006. And we may be the largest producer of orange wine in Canada, but certainly we make a lot of orange wine from Riedel and from our biodynamic grapes in Niagara-on-the-Lake. And so I, have a lot of experience working with Riedel, although in Kelowna we have a bit more acidity in the Riedel grapes. So last year just presented itself as being really nice, well-balanced grape. So we did a ferment, and one of the cool things about Riedel is that it really does get orange when you do the exposure to oxygen and the skin fermentation. I always include some stems in the mix as well, so that helps with the structure and body in the wine as well. But some grape varieties like Chardonnay, for example, and Sauvignon Blanc don't really get that orange. They have kind of a deeper yellow color. So the Riedel is sort of fun that way too.
So if anybody's not familiar with how these wines become orange, it's really about time spent on skins reaching a certain ripeness and then trying to extract color. I think trying is probably not the correct word, but extracting color because they're spending time more than you would. Normally, white grapes are gently pressed, juices pulled off, and white wine is clear and crisp and white.
Yeah, and a lot of styles, a lot of modern styles avoid the phenolics that you have in the skin. So we talk about tannin and color and reds, but not really very often in whites. Like there's some traditional styles in Spain and Italy that kind of, work with the natural phenolics in whites. But orange wine is, really an opportunity to embrace all of those kind of characteristics that white wines, avoid. So it's more, it's an expression of more of the grape, right? Like a red, but different because the nature of it. It's, it's not like a mini red or anything like that. It has its own sort of style and structure.
That's why I think it's a challenge to a palate, to a mind, to say, oh, we're going to try something completely kind of new experience, but it's like entirely uplifting because it's just all the neurons are firing because like, wait, what's going on here in this wine? Like, tasting it blind would be a real challenge to say, what are you tasting? But I think texturally, that's the attraction for me. I love these wines because of the texture, but there's also this amazing, interesting flavor profile that kind of brings me to like, wow, it's so versatile with food. It goes with everything. So it's a great bottle to surprise and share with people, just to say, hey, you want to try something new.
Where can we purchase this particular wine? Where could we purchase this?
Just directly from the winery at this point. Yeah.
Take that offer.
Yeah.
There you
go.
No,
and even more so with the Pinot Gris, the amber Pinot Gris. So this is also something we've been doing since 2014, but in the last couple of years, it's really, gained a lot of traction, and most of the Pinot Gris that we grow in the vineyard now is going into this orange wine. And most of it is pre-allocated. So I put some into this offer that's from our retail allocation, but we expect that most of all of it will be sold out.
Well, it says sold out. It says sold out on your website. So that's why it's like, it's in the offer. So how generous. Thank you. But what a fantastic bottle. And I can't say enough about this one. This really made me so delighted. I don't know, last year and the year before, I'm just like, this is just a great bottle, a great bottle. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things, like you were describing how orange wine is made, but in terms of the wine itself and how to talk about it or how to evaluate it, one of the things that I like to suggest is, don't think about fruity descriptors like you would in so many other styles of wines, white or red. Think about tea descriptors. So there's a lot of savoriness that you get because of the skin contact, and often stems are included. So rather than, I always find there's some like citrus notes, but it might be more like bergamot, where you're getting that sort of combination of savory and citrus. And then likewise, you might get some apple and pear notes, but there's always some other savory herbal notes that go along with it. So, and then often the aromatic varieties like Vidal, or if not in the case of these two wines, but for wines that are using aromatic varieties like Gewürztraminer or even Muscat varieties, you get a lot of like rose water notes and perfumey floral kind of notes that go along with it. So it's yeah, it really expands your lexicon for wine descriptors.
Really does. Yeah. And I also want to say, I was at Legacy today. This is a $40 bottle. So
35 now. Yeah.
Yeah, they were like that before tax. So it's like 37 on the shelf before tax. And I was like, whoa, I think our offer's pretty awesome, actually.
Yeah.
So this is like a beautiful bottle.
Yeah, and back to our old vines, Foch, and I like to emphasize, like Barb did, the old vines. So we get a lot of richness and full-bodied, nature in the wines, in the Foch wine, and but it's also very silky on the palate. So there's not a lot of tannin or grippiness. It's all about kind of the fullness of the body color and, to a certain extent, the alcohol that's giving it that richness. But it's not really high alcohol, but it's just not with all the tannin. So you can enjoy it with a broader range of foods. You can enjoy it young, but it also ages really well. So this wine is really like literally in our tasting room. It's always the top seller by bottles and by dollars. And yet in other channels where people have to kind of like reach for it off the shelf, it doesn't move. So we actually don't even bother trying to offer it in other retail channels, just from our own store.
It's a very unique style at this point. Only a few wineries do this very well. And, I think it's awesome that we can actually even be having this conversation. So, thank you. And we hope those vines stay healthy for another.
Yeah. And again, this is wild ferment. So all of these wines that we presented tonight are from wild fermentation. And, some are cloudy, some have low sulfites, some have no sulfites, but they would all be accepted by, raw, the raw festival.
Right.
We poured this at Raw in Montreal, and so fits kind of my description, but other more international description of what natural wine is.
So on that note, I'm going to stop this share, and we're going to hop back to hello everyone. We're going to hop back to where we were when we left off on the other slide. If there are any questions, I see there's 17 comments in the chat, so I'm assuming
I've been monitoring them.
I'm assuming you have. So thank you, Cassandra. It's awesome to have you here. So this is just, you can take a picture of this slide. This is how you get in touch with Sperling Vineyards. The wine offer is going to be up for another 5 days or so. So please, don't hesitate. Once it's gone, it's gone. So, that is the truth, but follow Ann and follow Sperling Vineyards on Instagram and Facebook. If you're in the Okanagan this summer, it's a great adventure to come by. Are you guys doing any of those events on site, Ann, with your group?
So we're doing a Paisley Notebook dinner on July 3rd. And yesterday I checked and there was something like 6 tickets left. So,
oh my goodness.
So if somebody moves quickly, they might still be able to attend.
Good luck, everyone.
And then, and we also have music in our Vineyard Labyrinth. Sometimes I can't remember right now. The dates,
I just want to show
there's quite a few.
The Labyrinth is this.
No, I think we took it's behind the regenerative.
It's in here somewhere.
Yeah, well, it's further down the slope, so you can't actually see it.
I don't think
but-
we have it in our pictures anymore, but it's a beautiful shot. Yeah.
So really quick, just because it's just become available in BC, so limited number of stores right now, but hopefully more very soon. My husband and I, because we didn't have enough to do, and what else do you do in the winter season if you're in the northern hemisphere, but go and make wine in the southern hemisphere, right? But really, it was a fun learning experience to explore vineyard properties in Argentina. And it's kind of like the famous place for Malbec, and we managed to find a very tiny vineyard. It's so small that it's off most wineries' radar. It's 7 acres of 1920 planting. It's really cool because it's own rooted vines. So we see a little bit of that in BC and in Washington State, but not very many places in the world grow vinifera on their own feet. But
can I just interject? Does everybody understand that the vinifera story is the reason it's not planted on vinifera is because of phylloxera, and so most vineyards are grafted with American rootstock on the bottom and then the vine on the Vitis vinifera on the top. But what Anne is saying here is this is to the core vinifera, right?
Yeah, and it's Malbec, right? And at the time of planting in the 1920s, they continue to propagate them, Massal selection. So we talk about Dijon clones in the northern hemisphere and clonal selections, which would be the same identical DNA from plant to plant, whereas this planting is meant to be a diversity. So even though it's all Malbec, they're not identical to one another. And the continuation of the vineyard over the 100+ years that it's existed is by layering, where you take a living cane from one plant and you bury it in the soil, and it grows roots and continues that. So, kind of like mycorrhizae connect plants from one to the other. Well, in this case, the plants are often connected to each other and propagated from each other. So it becomes its kind of own organism, or at least has its own unique traits by continuing to propagate itself, or with of course the human intervention. So it's sort of cool that way.
Whereabouts in Argentina? Cynthia was asking here. Where is the winery in Argentina?
So it's just a vineyard. So we don't actually own a physical structure. It's a tiny property. So we're hosted in another winery. But Mendoza is a province as well as a city in Argentina. And there's about 2,000 wineries, 2,000 producers in the province of Mendoza alone. And then there's a few other provinces that grow grapes. But so we're in the sub-appellation is called Luján de Cuyo, or Cuyo. And it's, I guess, where Malbec became famous in Argentina. And then all the other regions like the Uco Valley that you hear a lot more about today is a much younger growing region. So Luján's been growing vinifera and making fine wines for a very long time.
I've popped into the chat Paisley Notebook. She's a chef in the Okanagan. Her family had a wonderful Indian restaurant, came over from India, and she was also a previous Ladames d'Escoffier scholarship winner. So her food's amazing, and I can't even imagine anything better than being at your winery with that kind of magic. And she is she's a smaller lady with quite a forceful structure.
Of course.
She's a brown girl, and she was a previous soccer player, like up in the ranks in England. So she calls herself the little brown girl, or she's Indian spices she produces. So with your wine and her cuisine and both of your spirit, what a decadent evening that will be.
Yeah, no, I'm really looking forward to it because, of course, she wasn't doing any dinners during the pandemic. And prior to that, everything sells out so fast that, you have to be, almost in an inner circle. So to get to one of her events. So this, with having the lull, but also I think she's rolled out, 7 different events all for this summer. So she's a very busy lady, but like you say, she's a force, and I think that comes through in her food and in the event. So yeah, it'll be a lot of fun.
If you sign up for the newsletter, you will get the chance to register before the rest of the world, as I know.
Excellent inside scoop. I like it.
So just a little bit about, the Versado. We have a few labels. The one that's in BC right now, can you see it? The white label.
Yep.
So this is a $27 bottle, or should be in that range. And it's what we call our entry level from, our 7-acre property. We do selections of with 3 labels: Old Vine, Reserva, and the white label there. And it's just basically us geeking out on, not only the vineyard selection, but also our winemaking to
And
create these.
This is regenerative farming again, yes?
Yep, we're certified organic as of the 2015 vintage, and we farm with a horse, and we have cover crops and kind of traditional methods with like one person living on the property doing all the manual labor, and then occasional if we have to do tractor work or that sort of thing, it's like maybe 2 or 3 times a year that we have a tractor on the property. So
amazing. I will look forward to finding a bottle of this and trying. We did a Malbec Day not long ago because it was World Malbec Day. So, cheers to Malbec. It's very popular. People love it. People think of it when they think of steak dinners. They think of, what am I planning for the weekend? Oh, I'll get a bottle of Malbec. So this is right in the price point of quality Malbec. And I love that this is Old Vine again. And we don't have a definition of Old Vine, but, you want to speculate that you said the vineyards were planted around the 20s. So
no, it's actually certified as a 1920 planting. And that's one thing about Argentina. They've taken a lot of lessons from the French, and they're very bureaucratic in that way, which can drive you nuts. But it also means that when you have that mark, it's authentic. So that's sort of cool too.
So don't hesitate. This is worthy. Like, my goodness. Well, we've come to the end of the slide picture show. Yay!
Drama of it all.
I know, we've come to the end. But please unmute yourselves if you want to talk about what you're tasting, if you want to talk about, if you have questions, you want to ask Ann something, please, this is the time. This is the happy hour. It is approaching 7 bells, so I know we all turn into pumpkins around 8, so I know there's not much left. Having said that, yeah. Anybody has anything?
I just wanted to say.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Karen. Go ahead.
I'm just wondering if Anne remembers what the grapes were that went into the 2019 Market Red, because that's what I picked up at Save On.
Okay, yeah, the Market Red is a blend of Foch and Pinot Noir.
Cool. Thank you.
Foch and Pinot Noir continue to rule, the roost in terms of accessibility, few tannins, good acidity, nice balance, quaffable. Yeah. Anyone else? I think, Tori, you were going to ask a question?
I wasn't going to ask a question. I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you so much for this. This was wonderful. It's my first time being with you all, and I really appreciate it. Such great knowledge and such a wonderful group of mainly women, and also I think maybe some fellows, but I really appreciate you putting this on.
And Tori, where are you from, and how did you learn about Barb's and Ann's wonderful seminar?
I'm in the Okanagan. I'm a recent addition to the vineyard world. I'm
cool.
working right now for Meritage, the vineyard management company, and Joie Winery.
Oh,
So,
okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
we
I'm
know Schwab quite well, don't we?
yeah. So I just finished the OK College viticulture program, and I'm really passionate about starting this new stage of my life. And I found you guys through Sustainable Wine Growing BC.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. So thank you for
Well,
having me. I really appreciate it. This was so valuable.
thanks for joining us, Tori. It's a really valuable conversation too, because this isn't about yesterday. This is about where we're going.
I think
So-
information sharing is so important. I think in especially this space, we're all in it together. You know, we've talked about climate change. We've talked about, you know, some of the challenges we're facing. And, you know, it's something I'm very passionate about. So I appreciate you having me.
Awesome. And as a community that shares knowledge, we also share sipping. So, you know, we must taste together and discuss.
Yes.
Well, thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Anyone else we're kind of moving towards that big picture where you hold up your bottle and your glass together, and then we do another one of those beauty shots, and then we let Anne go and have a dinner, because I'm sure she's famished. She's dedicated so much time and energy to this. I can't thank you enough, Anne.
It's
Really
10 at
truly.
night out there. I hope
Yeah.
she's eating something.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I enjoy it. And I've been, you know, working on all this messaging too. So it's nice to kind of bring it all together in one place and
I
share
like-
some of our great vineyard photos and stuff too.
I think that's what a lot of the presentations I really love with Barb. I don't see anything until I get here, and she does such a great job of sort of pulling out the very interesting parts and putting that all together. So I really appreciate your work, Barb, in that way, because
Well,
it's
listen,
a very
I have
fluid presentation.
I have
Apart
to
from when I
say-
interrupt.
I have two things going for me. One, I have Cassandra. Two, I have great friends. Three, you know, Anne reached out, and I just can't thank her. I can't thank you enough, Anne. Like, really, it's so great for us to learn, because we want to further, you know, the understanding of good wine, and we want to further the experience that people can have with food and wine. And we also want to bring people to the Okanagan and support our local industry. So, you know, really important. I will never tire of doing this, even if no one shows up. I'll still be here with Cassandra, maybe. Cassandra, you've been nominated.
Oh, I
Okay,
can't go. Woo!
you can go. Okay, ladies, let's hold up our glasses. Is there a gentleman still in the room? Pavin? I don't know if Pavin is a gentleman or not, but I'm assuming so. So please raise a glass and a bottle, if you will. And I'm just going to do a final photo. So
Look, I'm drinking out of a goblet.
That's okay. Goblets work. So, but thank you everyone for coming. I'm just going to go 3, 2, 1, cheers. Oh, 3, 2, 1, cheers. And 3, 2, 1. Oh, Shannon. You'll work hard on that. We'll wait for you, hon. 3, 2, I'm trying to try to catch it. Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful evening.
Okay.
Thank
Thanks
you.
everyone.
Yeah,
Have a
thanks
wonderful
for
evening.
sharing your
Everyone,
time.
thank you,
Have a
Anne.
good
Thank you,
night.
Barb.
Thanks very much.
Yeah,
You. Take care.
All
Night.
right. Good night, everyone.
That sounded awesome.
It's not quite over yet. I have to do this. Stop the